Central Division, the Avalanche are the clear favorites. Plus 450 is the highest number I saw. They're between plus 380, plus 450, but no one's close. Every other team is basically in the double digits. I don't disagree that the Avalanche should be the clear favorite, but I think that there's enough here that scares me away from betting them, and it comes down to the goaltending. Alexander Georgiev, who I actually think I'm a little bit higher on than other people because his situation in New York was just very strange. He was supposed to be the starter. Kind of they were grooming him to be, and then Shesterkin, of course, caught fire in the KHL. They brought him over, and it just wasn't close. And I like Pavel Francouz, but still, with that goaltending tandem, and even though the team can outscore those problems and the fact that they lost Naz Kadri and Andrei Burakovsky, I think there's enough questions to be asked of this team that you can probably just wait and get a number, maybe a little higher as the season goes on, or this number. So I just wouldn't be rushing to bet them. I know you're higher on Colorado than I am, and you were last season, and we're proven right.
Yeah, so for me, I still think they're strong at that price because the Central, I think, is quite weak. And just compared to all the other top teams, mainly coming out of the East, I think there's such a good chance they get to round 3, which is what I love about that as a future. It's hard for me to see their floor not being quite high. They still got McKinnon, Makar, Rantanen, Landeskog, a whole bunch of guys that we know are going to be studs. Makar and Taves will be the best D pairing in the league again if they stay healthy. So I think there's a lot of room for upside. But yeah, at the same time, if you don't want to rush to get some money down, like the price is probably going to stay around that middle of the year. So it is what it is there, I believe.
Now let's talk about a team I think has some long shot value. That's the St. Louis Blues. You can find them as high as 40-1 in the betting market to win the Stanley Cup. The Blues overperformed by their underlying metrics last year. I think that's why a lot of people are out on them, and a lot of people who do modeling and whatever are having a tough time backing them to do what they did last season, which was make it to the second round and lose to the Avalanche, partly because Jordan Binnington got hurt, but still 109 points, one of the best offensive teams in the NHL last season, which is not something we're used to saying about this team. 43 of their 49 wins came in regulation, and the forward depth, despite the fact that they lost David Perron, is still quite good. Robert Thomas, Jordan Kyrou should continue their trajectory as two of the better young forwards in the league. They have a great supporting cast with a great two-way center in Ryan O'Reilly. Braden Shen is still a really good NHL scorer. Pavel Buchnevich is a first-line winger. We've learned that now. So the defense core, I think, is not great, but maybe a little bit better than people expect. As long as Torrey Krug can stay healthy, I believe in Jordan Binnington. I know he's got his detractors both on and off the ice, but just in terms of like on ice play, he was good the season before last, and he was bad in the regular season, but that could have just been a confluence of circumstances where he lost his starting job, and he's the type of guy that just is not going to cope with that. So now that he's the clear starter, should have a clear mind, should be healthy. I think he can backstop this team. I think the ceiling's high. And I think that you touched on, I think that the gap between the Avalanche and the rest of the division is so wide that you can make an argument for basically any team below Colorado to be the second best team. And for me, it would be the Blues.
Yeah, I like the Blues more than some of the teams in the mix there for sure. I think Kyrou, Thomas, we know are going to be pretty elite players this season. I think the offense should still click pretty well. So yeah, totally think they have more upside than the rest of what I feel is a pretty weak Central Division this season.
And these two teams are paired together a lot because one of them, the betting market always is infatuated with, which is the Minnesota Wild. They're minus 400 to make the playoffs. I think betting against that's actually pretty good number. The Wild, unlike the Blues, they had great 5-on-5 numbers, but they also overperformed. Like they were scoring 3.2 goals per 60 minutes at 5-on-5 last season. That was with Kevin Fiala, who is gone, and they were just shooting the lights out. Like their expected goals numbers were more than half a goal below that. And I know that the center depth held up last year with Eriksson Ek, Hartman, Freddie Gaudreau down the spine, but like you look at that unit and you can see like if they could struggle, and they're just not deep. I know Matthew Boldy had a good first 47 games, and Marco Rossi is a highly touted rookie, so you could see them stepping in and helping to replace some of the Fiala production. But, that's asking too many questions. But my biggest concern is, people keep talking about Marc-Andre Fleury being a great, signing for the Wild and whatever. He was bad last year. You want to draw a line through it because Chicago was bad. Fine. He was great the season before that, won the Vezina, but he was bad the season before that. Like he is up and down and up and down, and he doesn't have a safety net behind him. Philip Gustafson, I mean, all due respect to him, he's played 27 NHL games. I know they got, Jesper Wallstedt in the pipeline, but you'll never know with young goalies. So I think that this team is one of the most overrated in the entire league.
Yeah, they're a team that I'll be afraid of coming in. There's the price, I think, almost reflects that some of these things that need to go right are just going to go right. Like Marco Rossi, I'm high on him. I think he's still going to find a way to make it work. And Callan Addison's a good defender, but those things can go right, and they're probably still just about fairly priced. And then, yeah, Marc-Andre Fleury's been all over the place. The last time we saw, he won the Vezina in Vegas, so he gets a ton of clout for that, which fair enough. But that team was unreal. And the reason he got taken out was because Leonard still outperformed him arguably that season. So I think it's a lot of stock to just say for sure Fleury's a lock to be a good goalie this season. And that's definitely something you're banking on with this price.
And I think the reason people bank on that is because he's so well liked among the media. Like he just
for sure.
He's just
like
like
you
this.
Compare it to Jordan Binnington, which like we can
Right.
just say it, like a lot of people don't like him. So that's gonna cut into the stock a little bit. And yeah, it's a lot easier to back a guy like Marc-Andre Fleury that no one's ever said a bad word about, but he has struggled on and off relatively consistently.
And this team has less cap space to work with because of the buyouts to Parisi and Suter, 14 million or 12 million, whatever it is in cap space. So like their ability to adjust in season is also going to be handicapped from that. Like you said, I think that the market is pricing this team, and they do it all. It feels like the market always does this with the Wild, that they're pricing them as if everything is just a certainty to go their direction. And, maybe more things crack their way than don't. They're still a good team. They got a high-end superstar in Kirill Kaprizov, who I don't think is a terrible, MVP bet at 15-1 if you're going to bet someone outside of that top tier. But there's just enough here that they shouldn't be minus 400. They shouldn't be. The disparity between them and the Blues is just way too wide. And even like you look at Nashville, Dallas, and Winnipeg, like if you're going to throw all these teams in front of me, I would probably put the Wild as my least favorite bet. Do I think that doesn't mean I think they're the worst team of that group, but just from a betting perspective and going into the season, like they're the one I think is priced out of whack the most.
Yeah, my main takeaway, if I had one with this team, would just be that I really don't like them as a cup outright bet. They're a team that I'd definitely be staying away from in that market. I think we saw last year what was a pretty fair series result when they lost in round 1 to St. Louis. And I just don't think there's enough reasoning to look for something different happening this year. And then if they end up getting through St. Louis in round 1, I think they're walking right into Colorado, who'll be a pretty heavy favorite unless they're quite dinged up. So I just think there's not much value with a play on them to win the cup.
Let's stick with another team that I think is overrated, the Nashville Predators, who in that same kind of vein had everything go right for them last year, almost under the radar until it didn't. Like losing Juuse Saros before the Colorado series, which they weren't going to win with him anyways, was a massive blow. And he got hurt right before the season ended, so maybe they could have avoided that matchup. However you want to paint it, that was a terrible stroke of bad luck. But before that, I mean, they got a career year out of Philip Forsberg, a generational year from a defenseman in Roman Josi. Matt Duchene and Ryan Johansson turned back the clock. I think everyone had kind of just written them off at some point, but they have these resurgent years. So the Predators end up getting basically the ceiling from every player they needed to get the ceiling from. And now they're being priced 40-1, 50-1 to win the Stanley Cup. They're ahead of St. Louis in terms of season point totals and divisional odds in most places. I think the Predators, I don't, particularly do it often, but like if you're going to tie up money for a whole year and miss the playoff bet, like they're plus 170 to miss the playoffs. I think that's pretty high. And they're just a team I think is generally overrated going into the season. Unders, miss the playoffs, however you want to play them. I'm against Nashville here. I think that they'll be we could see 5-3 make the playoffs in the West, maybe 5 out of the Pacific and 3 in the Central. But even if it's 4-4 or 5-3, I could totally see the Predators completely bottoming out here, and just being mediocre.
Yeah, I think they are going to be mediocre. I think the bottom might not be too low, barring a potential Saros injury, just because he is going to win them some games, probably regardless of how they play. We saw that the year before when they truly were somewhat of a bad team. But yeah, it seemed like a lot of things went right last year. We saw really good performances from some aging veterans that I think to count on them to even play at that level again this season is unlikely. And then we saw guys like Tanner Jeannot had, I think, we're not going to see more from him this season, and he was a crucial part of their team. So I just think there's a lot of things that could work out poorly, and the prices you're seeing kind of reflect somewhat of a lock that they're going to be the postseason. So yeah, I think like you said, plus 170 to miss playoffs is a pretty strong number.
And the Saros injury, I know they didn't have a great backup last year, but it's Kevin Lankinen who struggled last year, so there's no safety net there. On Nashville, let's talk about Dallas now, who I think of all the teams in the Western Conference and maybe the NHL, I feel like I have the worst feel for them. New coach Peter DeBoer, a goaltender Jake Ottinger, who's being kind of priced and talked about like he's a shoo-in to be a top 10 goalie in the league. I don't know about that. He was great in the playoffs, but that was 7 games. He was pretty much bang average. And for a 23-year-old, that's what you'd expect during the regular season. And they're going to need him because their safety net's gone. I like Scott Wedgwood as a backup, but last year they went into the season with 4 goalies: Ben Bishop, Ottinger, Braden Holtby, and Anton Hudobin. And now it's Ottinger and Wedgwood. So we just don't know how Ottinger is going to perform over an entire season. They lose John Klingberg, who I think is not a huge loss defensively and in front of Ottinger, but he's someone who's been there for a while, very good in the offensive zone, keeps plays alive very well. So he's gone. Jason Robertson still not signed, so that's another issue if you're going to be investing in like season point totals, because he scored 40 something goals for them last year, and was part of one of the best lines in hockey: Pavelski, Hintz, and Robertson. But then behind them, that's when the questions really start to be asked, right? We know that they have the good first line, they've got a good top 2 on defense in Suter and Heiskanen, but the depth is a question here. I like Peter DeBoer as a coach for a couple seasons with every team. He seems to wear his welcome out, but this is a new team, so he usually has his teams playing pretty well 5-on-5. So there is some upside, but I think there's more downside. So in other words, I think where they're priced, which is like right smack in the middle of the board, is about right.
Yeah, that looks fair to me. And I think I'm high enough on them to think that this works towards a missed postseason bet for the Predators a little bit, that they're generally regarded below them. But yeah, and I think you touched on it with Robertson, but getting involved in this team in any way to start the year without him signed, like I think they're going to work it out. But getting involved without him signed seems a little crazy. They were one of the most one line, like they were so carried by that top line last year at times. It was almost crazy the results they even got, having one line playing at such a high level, reasonable goaltending, and a strong defense pair, and managing to get reasonable results behind that. So yeah, they're definitely a team I'd be careful of.
They played 21 or 22 overtime games last year, and they won 15 too. So, they barely, like the Predators, barely just got into the playoffs. The Predators were the last team into the field in the Western Conference last season and had everything go right. Dallas was 1 point ahead of Nashville and won 15 overtime games. So if they even just split those, Vegas gets in over them. So this is another thing to keep in mind. Dallas, they're around 50-1 to win the Stanley Cup. So it's not like, I'm not saying like, oh, they're overrated. I'm just, I just think that they're probably where they belong. And another team, I think you can sit back and wait. And if they are better, you'll still catch a good number on them. Now a team that I do like relative to where they are in the market is Winnipeg. They're 60-1 to win the Stanley Cup. Not endorsing that, but I just think they're better than people. They're coming off a really bad year. They're coming off a very bad year. Their coach resigned in the middle of, down stretch in the winter. The players just, nobody seemed to really be gelling. It was a strange year in Manitoba. And they were still hanging around. Like they didn't really go away till mid-March or so. And when things finally came undone, and by that time they'd already traded away some important players. And the offensive core is still there with Dubois, even though he's already said that he'll play his contract out and is probably going to leave, and Scheifele, who was in trade rumors, and Blake Wheeler was in trade rumors. But they got Kyle Connor, they got Cole Perfetti coming, should be breaking into the league as well, and being a high upside youngster. So top six is still dangerous enough, and the goaltending with Connor Hellebuck is still good enough, where if Rick Bowness, who coached the Jets in 1988, 1989, before I was born, he's back. He's back in Winnipeg. I think he's actually kind of the right coach for this team, because they don't need someone to like micromanage. They just need someone to kind of keep them on the arrow. I like the upside here. Don't know if it's more of a game to game thing, if it's a sprinkle on Hellebuck to win the Vezina or Kyle Connor to win the Rocket Richard as most goals, or something like that. But I think even Bonus as a Jack Adams outsider, I like Winnipeg is what I'm trying to say, much more than the market. Everyone's out on the Jets.
Yeah, I'm a little lower on the Jets than you two. I'll defend Connor Hellebuck. I thought he was better last year than people thought on a team that was a bit of a train wreck defensively. But I like Bowness, and I can see the past upside. Kyle Connor's unreal. Nikolai Ehlers might be one of the more underrated guys in the whole league, and I think that line is going to fly. But I still just think Scheifele, Wheeler, they're both very bad in their own end, which I think is a big concern with this defense core. Maybe Bowness gets them playing a little differently to an extent, but for me, it's going to be a big ask for them to play defensively well enough. And I just think the question marks are real. I think they're a team I'll probably just be looking to target some of those guys in fantasy, and perhaps on some player awards.
Yeah, Ehlers is 300 to 1 to win the Hart Trophy, which is not going to win, but I like that as like if you're going to pick someone really, really deep down the board, because you could see him have like a Huberdeau, Jonathan Huberdeau from last season kind of point total with playing with Scheifele and Connor. Yeah, I think I think I'm probably too high on the Jets. I liked them last year too, and maybe I just haven't learned my lesson with them. So hopefully I'm a little quicker to adjust on this team if things don't go well. Now we get to talk about the also rans in the division, Arizona and Chicago. I'm going to start with Chicago because I have a lot to say about Arizona, but I know you have a lot to say about the Blackhawks.
Yeah, so I'm sure a lot of people have seen I've been high on Chicago to finish with the worst regular season record, which can be had at around plus 400. There's a lot of reasons this team could be quite bad. I think we saw last season how ugly it got, and I don't think there's much reason it's going to turn around. And Davidson, their GM, he's spoken out that they don't want to overuse their young guys, which is a point that I like heading into this, because if they're not going to use some of these young guys, what's left is really weak. I think the defense core it's pretty awful. Kane and Taves are both winding down. Even if Patrick Kane bounces back with a bit of a better year than we saw last season, there's still a lot of areas that they could really struggle up front. And then Andreas Athanasiou and Max Domi, they're both going to play fairly big minutes, and I'm pretty low on both of them, and they're getting priced here with some onus that those two vets are going to be relatively effective. And I think they're both going to struggle in the roles that they're being given. Like we saw, I sent you the power play unit for this team, and it does not look good right now. I think Taylor Radish I liked him over some of the guys that were out there. So yeah, I think there's a lot of areas that they could really struggle, and the goaltending tandem should be quite poor again.
Yeah, there's not much more to add there. I think, if you listen to our Eastern Conference preview on the Action Network podcast feed, we break down why we like the Flyers as a wooden spoon bet. The Blackhawks, I think, are another strong one. If you have both those teams in your pocket, you're probably going to come out ahead, because we love the Arizona Coyotes on this podcast, at least relative to the market. They're the favorite to win the wooden spoon, finish with the worst record, plus 250. There's a couple things I like about Arizona that makes me think that their floor is just a little bit higher than what the market's pricing it at. And first of all, they become the butt of every joke in the NHL. Like the Arizona Coyotes are where the Islanders kind of were a decade ago, the doormat of the league, the team with the arena issues. The media makes fun of them because they were, the empty seats and the market and everything. So that right away that depresses the value on a team. And I just don't think they're going to be that bad. Like they played hard for their coach, who I think is pretty good, Andre Torini last season. The goaltending, like Karel Vejmelka in his first NHL season out of nowhere, was a complete unheralded goaltender, came in and played better than I think people expected. He wasn't great, but slightly below average or wherever he ended up is fine on a team like this. And he showed the ability to win games on his own if he's a little more consistent, which I think is the plan. When you think about taking a step forward for a goaltender, then this team becomes, the floor goes up a little higher. Then you also have this young core that's now playing together for another season. So there's just enough pointing in the right direction. It's still like, this is going to be a 67-point team, or a 72-point team at its ceiling, which is, bad, but it's just this, they're being priced like they're going to be the worst team in the league. I think Chicago's worse than them. I think Arizona has more reason, more incentive to like show up every day and play hard. And part of the reason they have been made fun of so much is they were going to be playing at the Arizona State University hockey rink, seats 3,500 or so. I actually think that's a sneaky spot to keep an eye on from a betting perspective. NHL players are such creatures of habit. Like, it's just going to be weird for the opposing teams to walk into this arena and play an NHL game in it. Like, they haven't played in front of these crowds since junior or college or whatever. And the Coyotes are going to be used to it. They're just going to be, familiar with the surroundings, with the facilities, everything. So I actually think we could have a little bit of a poor man's Vegas flu situation where the Coyotes just have a much better record at home than they do on the road, and teams struggle there. So I'm going to be targeting Arizona at home games. I think that they'll be big prices. They're going to be an underdog basically every game this season, except for when they play, Chicago at home and Philadelphia at home and maybe Buffalo and Montreal. But so you're going to get paid off on it. And I think if you're ahead of the curve in a situation like that, it's worth the risk of it not being a thing. So I like, this is it sounds like I'm, pumping their tires to like win the Stanley Cup or something, but I just think that this is a 70-point team, and that's great.
Yeah, I think there's a little more upside defensively than the Hawks, which is probably the one area I would defend. And I love Vejmelka when he's on, so I see the narrative there that he could be better in the Hawks goalies. We know they're going to be a bottom team and are probably content to be in the lottery mix, but hopefully just a little less of the time than the odds makers are expecting for us.
Yeah, the defense situation is interesting too, because Jacob Chikrin has said like he's just waiting to be traded, and he's there. He's not a great best defenseman, but he's their best defenseman almost by like default here, at least the most complete. But you could see like Victor Soderstrom or Connor Timmins, take step forwards. Shane Gostisbehere was really good last year in his role, and then like we said, like Vejmelka, and then I think it's Ivan Provostov who will be the other young goalie in Arizona, and if he's good, who knows? But I just think they're going to be tough to play against in a way too. They're pretty big, like like they could be like a nasty team to play against with Nick. You think about Nick Ritchie and Zach Cassian in their top six, Lawson Krause, Kristen Fisher, Liam O'Brien. Like, these are guys who just are not going to be fun to play against. And then the top six is, of course, like you just said, they're going to be bad. But Clayton Keller, Nick Schmaltz was good last year. Barrett Hayton could take a step forward. So there's just enough here that I think Arizona will be better than one of the two worst teams in the league, or two teams in the league, which they weren't the worst team in the league last year. So that is already saying something, and kind of goes to show, because everyone just assumed that they were going to be historically bad, and they weren't.